Welcome in. It is opening day part 2 here on Live Before Lock on the Awesemo channel. This is exciting. Not only is Terry in the house and you out there and I get to hear what Terry has to say as we build a couple of winning lineups tonight, but it is day 2 of the season opener. Tyler's in the house producing. So if you're out there, make sure you hit that thumbs up button, please. We don't ask much. We have a bunch of things we're going to tell you about what's going on with this channel, just more ways in which you can get on here at a reduced rate. That's really what this is, to join the Awesemo community. Terry, my friend, the one Philly I did not bet has already gone long. So hopefully the rest of them can come along here, but we've got bigger fish to fry tonight. And it's always a pleasure. And yes, there are some baseball movie questions I have lined up here for you as well.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. We can definitely get into that. There's a long history of good baseball movies to talk about.
Well, I have a specific something. Okay. I'm not just going to ask you a general topic. I need to get to the depths with you. Yes.
Yeah, can't wait. But I love it. It's baseball season again, opening day. Have my Yankees on. They're tied at 4 right now. It looks like in the bottom of the 8th with a runner on first and 1 out. So we'll see what happens there. Your Phils are going. I've got Aaron Nola on the hill. I just made one lineup for the early slate, but I did use Nola. So I have a little vested interest in your Phillies there. Love Nola. I think he's a fantastic pitcher.
Tough year last year, but I think he bounces back.
Yeah, and the underlying metrics, we were talking about it on the earlier strategy show, the underlying metrics were really still pretty sound. I mean, the ERA got a little ugly based on some of their defense, but he was a 3.3 something xFIP. Nola's A+ for me. I'm always happy to go with Nola, but we've got an interesting mix of pitchers to go through on this slate for sure.
Yes, we do.
It should be interesting to get into.
Absolutely, including a guy who we thought maybe a week ago would be in a completely different uniform, was up until a day or so ago. So yeah, we have to go through this slate tonight, and we will, but also it gives us an opportunity, right? There are going to be a lot of people that maybe are trickling over from hockey, the NBA, the regular seasons are winding down. Maybe they're newer to just MLB DFS in general here. So when you look at the start of the season, because we're not knee deep, right? 83 games in where you have a ton of metrics and data and things to look at. What are some things, and just overall, if you will, kind of early season strategy that you apply? And maybe there's something that you see being applied early on in the season that you stay away from, just as kind of a mentality that will cost you money if you got to go down that road.
So for me, it's typically I'm going to establish track records, right? I like baseball takes a very long time to normalize samples, particularly for hitting. You want 500, 1,000 plate appearances before we're deciding who these guys really are. That's why things like BVP don't matter. You're never going to have a hitter who's faced a pitcher 500 times. So none of the numbers really matter mathematically. So I'm really looking to, rather than rostering guys who are question marks or guys who have had a hot spring, but we don't have a long track record with them, and guys who, maybe had a very cold spring, a bad spring, but came in and we know who they are as a hitter, or a guy who maybe struggled for a specific reason last year, but we have a long track record with them. I'm going to those types. So like I wrote about the Blue Jays in my article on the site today, and a hitter who stands out from that perspective in that lineup is Matt Chapman. Chapman came over from the Athletics. They kicked out, basically everybody who had any kind of major league talent as part of their rebuild, lands at the back end of that ridiculously talented Blue Jays lineup, still is a phenomenal power hitter, a guy who hit 30 some odd home runs in 2019, still hit 27 last year, struggled with the hit tool, had a 210 batting average last season, struggled with the hit tool, the on base slipped, and a lot of his numbers slipped. Guy's still only 28 years old. We're talking about a guy who was a former AL MVP candidate. I mean, a guy who has an established track record. I am happy to go back to him at a low cost, at low ownership at the back end of a Blue Jays stack, just as one example of a guy like that, that's how I think about it. So I'm all about the long-term track records, and I don't care about like recent spring training buzz, things like that. That's a lot less important to me.
Yeah, and it makes sense too, especially because I think people can get caught up on that, something recent, something, especially if it's being written up as a point there. So if you can absolutely move on from it, then by sure. And look, I put it out there in the chat. I don't ask much. Really, whenever I do shows, the only thing I ever ask is for you to hit the thumbs up button out there and to be nice to Terry. Those are really the two things. Like, I don't even ask you to be nice to Tyler because I know that's built in, like you all out there will be. But that's all. Just hit the thumbs up button and be nice to Terry. In this case, I'm going to add a third and say that if we can collectively will 2 home runs from Rhys Hoskins. It's not going to happen, but can we collectively will it to happen? Okay.
Power of positive thinking. Get those home run vibes out there for Rhys Hoskins. We need 2.
Yeah, I need 2. It's like the Seinfeld episode.
That's exactly where I was going. The little kid in Seinfeld. Joey.
And where the hell did you get 2 from? I'm not a home run. All right. So let's look at this thing overall. And, we can bounce around game by game for sure. Any questions that people have here as far as pitchers and stacks, we're going to get into that here as well. Let's look at the first game because I was curious, right? Because this is our real first look at the main slate. So I know that we haven't really bounced around game by game either. So we can kind of do both, right? One or the other. So you're cool to go in the game by game scenario?
I'm cool with it. So far, you've given me one choice and said we're going to go both and we're going to go either way or one or the other. So I'm cool with whatever you want to do, man. You're driving the car. I'm just sitting.
Okay. Well, I want to make sure Tyler was okay with it first and foremost before I start pulling some crazy shit out of my hat. Not on purpose, but
usually an either or involves 2 choices, and you only gave one. It was game by game every time. So
I don't come into contact with quick people on the regular like you before these shows. So I that's what I thought. I could just slide that one by you right there. All right, well, let's look.
If I'm your standard for quick, I don't want to hang out with the people you're hanging out with.
Well, I'm just north of in the burbs of Philly, so draw your own conclusions. All right, so let's look at Scherzer here in Washington. Mets Nats. It's a decent 154 or so line for the Mets on the road. I know there was a lot of concern, right, leading up the pushback here for Scherzer start in general, and then also on the other side with Washington. So we can look at that from really, I think, starting with the pitchers and Gray versus, what we mentioned here with Scherzer, and then also on the other side of it, looking at some stacks. But let's just start with the pitchers themselves. Clearly, Scherzer is going to get a ton of ownership. We have 4 guys that are north of 30 on this slate, and he happens to be one of them. On the flip side, if you were looking for some leverage here, it would definitely start, I think, with Josiah Gray, maybe Merrill Kelly, who we'll get to a little bit later.
Yeah, I do think Josiah Gray is interesting. Both of the Jay Grays are interesting on this slate. You got to be careful when you're rostering that you get the right one. I think Josiah is a talented kid. 70 and 2/3 last year, gave us a 24.8% strikeout rate as a rookie. He was at a 10.7% walk rate, a 5.05 FIP, and a 1.36 WHIP. So we need to temper expectations around him. But as a low-owned, fairly inexpensive, 76 on DK, 74 on FanDuel. As a lower owned SP2 option on DK at that 7,600 price, I do think he works better than some of these other choices that you've got. So I think there is some value in getting to him over, I forget who the other standout SP2 was. We'll get to it eventually, and it'll pop back into my head. Sorry?
As far as Barrios?
Barrios was one, but there was let me jump over to the top pitchers and that.
Yeah, I was looking at the top pitchers too, which I'm sure I have Barrios as far as top 2. Now value.
Oh, it was on DK. It was John Gray. And there's a direct comparison there for DK because John Gray is 5,400 on the DK slate. So he's a lot less expensive than Josiah Gray. So he's drawing a ton of ownership over there. He's 38% owned, 18.4% probability of being in the top 2, where if you pay up to go to Josiah Gray, he's 15.6% probability of being top 2. So you're only losing 3 percentage points and he's only 6.3% owned. So he's in a tough spot. He's going up against a Mets lineup that is much improved and very dangerous. But there is a possibility there that he could set you apart from a massive amount of the field that's going to John Gray as the other value. You buy more by going to John Gray in terms of what hitters you can combine together with the salary savings. But I think with that ownership differential, that's where Josiah Gray got interesting to me, was in that direct heads up. Yeah, you're paying more, but you're gaining a lot through that ownership differential to do it with. On the other side of the game, Max is the apex starter on the slate. I don't think there's any question about that in terms of his talent, in terms of where he projects. You mentioned, they were a little bit nervous about him. They pushed back his start by a day, balky hamstring. If they're putting him on the mound, I have to assume, general relative health. We've seen, with the 3-week spring training, all these guys are only pushed up to 80, 90 pitches anyway. So I think we're looking at like a 90 pitch cap somewhere around there for Max, assuming no issues with the hammy, assuming they're not going super kid gloves treatment and giving him like 2 innings and then yanking him. I think we're okay here. I don't love that we have to take that little bit of a question mark with the 11,000 and 10-2 salaries. But I think Max Scherzer is always worthwhile in doing that. One little issue to point out with this Nationals lineup, there's 3 excellent power hitters at the top of the lineup. They combined to bring this team, they haul this team up to, using last year's stats, a 3.09 home run rate, which is 24th out of 30 teams in baseball, and a 162 ISO, which is 25th. So even with Juan Soto, Nelson Cruz, and Josh Bell's power, this team still struggles overall for power using last year's numbers to combine everything together. What they excel in is limiting strikeouts against right-handed pitching. All that's in the split against righties. They were best in baseball using last year's numbers with a 20.5% strikeout rate against righties. So there might be the possibility that there are fewer strikeouts on the board here from Max. You get an excellent hitter like Juan Soto, 14.2% strikeout rate and a ridiculous 22.2% walk rate last season. That's just bananas. Juan Soto is the best hitter in the league.
Well, I'm sorry.
But no, go ahead. Cut me off. I've been talking.
No, you haven't, because you answered my own question. And I think at this point, even if it's at minus 140, going under 6.5 Ks for Max Scherzer, which is going to translate into what you think as far as, even if it's at a 90 pitch count combined with the top end of that lineup, is that any? So when you look at DK, clearly you're going to have that second pitcher slot, and it shouldn't be a deterrent. But something, if it's just the top of the lineup that you laid out versus, as well, I should say, compounded with the expectation that he's not going to go out there today and throw 110 pitches. Is there any sense of deterrent there when you are looking at the FanDuel options? Because you can get a little bit more with guys like Berrios and Manaea, who we'll talk about a little deeper as far as leverage is concerned, by saving, even if it's 2 to 3K.
Yeah, and I'm someone who is always willing to dip into, especially that mid-range of starters where you're getting the 8s and maybe the low 9s or the high 7s, especially on the FanDuel slate, where you don't need to go down to the super cheap guys like you do with the SP2s on DK a lot of the time. I'm always willing to live in that range. So like a Berrios, Sean Manaea. On this slate in particular, though, I do still want to be in the Max Scherzer business. I just get such a bigger projection on him. He's basically 10 points out ahead of Sean Manaea, who's my number 2 on this board. Okay. I like the matchup better from Manaea going up against that Diamondbacks. They're a pretty toothless lineup there, and he's only 8,800. So I definitely want to get to a lot of shares of him, but I'm probably going to end up around the field, if not a little bit ahead of the field. Field's only at 26% on Max on FanDuel. So I can get to 30%, 35% of Max, not totally tank 150 lineups, and still have a very good shot of rostering the top pitcher ahead of the field. So I think that's the plan for as these lineups come together. 36% on DK, similar situation. You're going up against 200% ownership. That's perfectly fine. So I think Max is totally rosterable here. The line that you gave for the strikeouts is interesting. I've got him with a projection of 7.5 strikeouts.
Yeah.
That's if we're giving him over 6 innings. So if we take it down to 5 innings, that could get a little interesting around that strikeout number. It's not.
How wide is that gray area? Is that 5 to 6 inning area, right? I mean, right. You're right. This is like playing somebody who could be out there for like 2 minutes in the NBA game, where you're just debating whether or not those small amount, like that 1 inning, determines whether or not you place this bet.
Exactly. If you see him take the mound for that 6th inning, you're probably losing that bet because he's probably striking out one of those 3 outs, right? So that's the difficult spot. Yeah. And look, I mean, we're also talking about Max Scherzer, even against a lineup that does well with limiting strikeouts. Max could have, 7 strikeouts through the first 3 innings and be totally fine here. So for DFS purposes, I'm gung-ho about it. Yep. For that bet, it's at least interesting. I wish you were getting a better price on it, though, I think.
Well, the over is going to be like plus 120 if you were going to go over 6.5. So maybe there's some risk reward there, knowing that if you do get to the 6th inning, that's basically a lock.
Could be. That's a tidy line, though. That's
I know it's
a line with these strikeout rates and the question mark about the pitches.
All right, before we move on here, anything from the stack standpoint, when we look at our stack tools, it's going to be so heavy of an ownership share that you're going to find for the New York Mets. Washington, on the flip side, a lot of that, right, with Scherzer, is going to be pretty leverageable, but there are some other options, even if it's cheaper options that we'll talk about, like Texas and Cincinnati. So I don't know if the leverage is worth it as much to get with Washington on the field, but how do you kind of find yourself super low ownership for Washington when it comes to their stack on DK? And then it's going to be the complete opposite. The highest owned stack we have projected is the Mets.
Yeah, so it's difficult to get to the Nats, even if you're saying, hey, I want to throw it at some of that ownership that's going to Scherzer. He's at 36%. It's not like he's, runaway train kind of ownership right now on DK. He's popular, certainly, but it's not a massive, ridiculous portion of the field that you'd be taking out. And it's such low probability that you're really going to get that wipeout game where they light him up, that it's making that much of a difference for you. The hitters that I like in the Nationals lineup, obviously Juan Soto, I just named him as the best hitter in the league. I would hope I like him. Nelson Cruz with all his power hitting behind Soto and in front of Josh Bell. I like that trio. You can bolt on Cesar Hernandez up at the top of it, 2,400 on FanDuel, 4,300 on DK. You hope he's getting on base a little bit more frequently this year and letting those guys knock him in. If you're playing on DK, you can grab Keibert Ruiz as a catcher option. He's very cheap and only 2% owned and hitting right behind that group of hitters. The guys that fill out the rest of the lineup are more, they're contributing to those quality low strikeout rate numbers, but like Yadiel Hernandez, Michael Franco, Alcides Escobar, those aren't really prime DFS targets for me. They're just guys who have decent contact skills, don't strike out a lot, put the ball in play, but you're not talking about a lot of power across those guys. Nobody over a 150 ISO. You're not talking about a lot of run creation. So really it's about that limited group at the top of this lineup. And against the guy of Max Scherzer's caliber, I just don't know if we need to be there more than, a couple dart throws just to, it'd be more the situation where I'm saying, all right, I've got 35% Max Scherzer. Let me grab 3 or 4 Nat stacks just in case, right? You're just going to throw those in. It's not really a situation where I think I'm looking to leverage up with a lot of Nats against Max.
Makes sense. All right, let's move on here. Texas at Toronto. You referenced what you were focusing on.
Real quick, ton of power in the Mets lineup today. Getting massive home run numbers. Pete Alonso, again, leading the way in my home run model at 23.65, basically double the magic number of 10, but a lot of guys up over 10. So I do like that Mets stack, but they're super popular and they're expensive. So good luck with getting it different and getting it cheap. That's the struggle there.
Is there any opportunity, instead of getting it cheap, can you just reduce it, 2-man stacks, things along those lines, and maybe work that angle because of the shorter slate and the expected power coming from that lineup to just not do it as one-offs?
Yeah, I mean, there's some guys that can help you offset. One guy that stands out in the middle of the lineup is Eduardo Escobar. Only 10.3% owned on the DK slate at 4,800, 11.6 on the FanDuel slate, 2,900, second and third base eligibility. Nice power marks for Escobar. Hit 28 home runs last season, 219 ISO. The contact isn't great, 8.9% barrel rate, 34% hard hit, but he doesn't strike out a ton, puts the ball in play, gets bat on ball. So I like Escobar as a differentiator and somebody who can help offset price a little bit. Nimmo, if he was cheaper, or if he was lower owned, would be interesting at the top of the lineup because he's cheap, but he's owned pushing 30% ownership as the most popular Met on the FanDuel slate, 20% on DK. So he's not really a differentiator. Marte, Lindor, and Alonso are offsetting a little bit of ownership just because of their pricing. That said, they're all actually under 4,000 on FanDuel, which actually does make them inexpensive on FanDuel. It's just that they're going to get popularity over there because of that. So they're mispriced a little bit on the FanDuel slate, but I don't think you really gain out of it because of all the ownership that's there. Maybe you go toward the back end, like they're quality up and down. I don't really believe in Jeff McNeil. He's a guy who's gotten really, really lucky in terms of the BABIP over the first few years of his career and then just tanked last season. Mark Canha, I do believe in. I think he's got a quality bat, and it looks opposite. It looks like he didn't have a good year last year for box score hunters, but he's somebody who I kind of believe in, and he's going under owned, but he's really expensive, 5,000 on DK for him. That's a little tricky. 2,700, a lot more friendly on FanDuel there.
All right, let's move.
Places to go.
Yeah, no, and it's definitely worth exploring again, especially with a stack that's so expensive, to either force to roster the stack in its entirety or just overlook it because of the cost. There has to be middle ground. So that's exactly why it's good for you to lay that out for sure. All right, let's hit Texas at Toronto. We also have to tell you about what's happening here with our awesome MLB Weekly Express Pass. All right, so this is the $1 MLB Express Weekly Pass. Player rankings, ownership rankings, your lineup builder, expert Discord chat, which will tell you even more about. The Discord is through the roof. Love the Discord. I'm spending way too much time on the Discord there. Use our promo code FASTBALL, right? Click that link. Use our promo code FASTBALL, all one word, FASTBALL, and you can get going here, up and running. Use all the tools alongside what Terry's breaking down. So when I reference the stack tools or Terry references top pitchers, you can be on there as well as listening and watching the show. Fastball, and it's good until April 11th. That's 3 days from now. All right, Texas at Toronto. And we'll get to Toronto in a second, but there was an interesting question from Larry about how San Martin is 2K more on DK than John Gray, who you referenced, mind you, at 5,400. So, we'll talk about that Cincinnati Atlanta game in a second, but just as far as reference is concerned, that at least was the question with Gray being so low at 5,400 compared to at least San Martin on there. Yeah, it is 2,400 points, pardon me, difference.
Yeah, San Martin not really on the board for me here. 7,800 on DK against that ridiculously good Braves lineup. That's not a spot that I want to dabble with.
Right?
Yeah, and this is a guy he's like a quad A lefty. He's not a major league talent. He's not really a highly regarded prospect. 23.4% strikeout rate over 11 2/3 last year in the majors. And he was at like 25% over 80 some odd innings in AAA last year. He's okay, but he's not going to come out here and blow away this Braves lineup, getting massive power numbers for the Braves up and down the lineup. That lineup plays basically 1 through 9 with very, very good hitters and a lot of power. So that's not really a spot that I want to mess with. He's super low owned. Could you get away with something? Probably not. I don't think even at that price or at that ownership, I just don't see it for him. So I think I would go to John Gray over him, despite the popularity of John Gray for the discount. And then I would probably look to maybe Josiah Gray for a similarly owned guy from a similar price tier. Josiah 7,400, similarly low owned. I think it was like 6% ownership on DK going up against a good lineup against that Mets lineup. But I think these Braves are better than the Mets are.
Yeah, you were right, by the way, 6.3 on the dot. Gray is catching. And look, I bring it up because there really are two strong options that people have on FanDuel from an ownership projection standpoint in Scherzer, who we discussed, and Charlie Morton, who we're going to get to. You have that middle, right, with the next tier, Toronto, who we're going to get to now, San Diego, we talked about. And then there's kind of Gray as far as all the guys with single-digit ownership. There's Gray at like 5.3, which is not 1, right? It's not 1. It's not 0.8. It's not like somebody's out there building 150 lineups and decided to throw Reed Detmers in there. No, this is like legit. There are enough people to get it to bump it up to 5.3. So if you are building 150 out here, a bunch of lineups tonight on FanDuel, do you anticipate getting to Gray even remotely close to what the field is, or maybe even a little more? They're at 5.3.
That's a tricky one. That's going to be a question that I'll be able to answer better. And unfortunately, we won't be on a show at the time. But it'll be a question of how the lineups come together with the bats, the stacks. How do those top stacks come together? Because at 76, he does make a lot of things work. And he is the probably, I think, cheapest on FanDuel viable pitcher. It depends on what we think of Merrill Kelly.
Yeah.
I don't love either one of those spots. I think I am going to use John Gray a decent amount this season, not pitching in Colorado anymore. I like the pitcher overall, 24.4% strikeout rate. Needs to cut down the walks, but it was still an effective 404 xFIP last season. Good swinging strike rate. I think he's going to have an okay year for Texas. I just don't like this spot going up against this Blue Jays lineup. It's another lineup that's just absolutely dynamite from top to bottom, really. I wrote them up in the article as my top stack, my featured stack of the day, getting some very strong power numbers and just great projections from the hit tool, the lack of strikeouts that this team has. It's just a very, very good lineup. So I don't think it's the right spot for Gray. And on the DK slate at the $5,400 salary with 40% of the field rostering him, I just think it makes some sense to get away from that, get yourself different, get yourself away from what's probably going to be a bruised and battered John Gray by the end of this night, going up against that Jays lineup. If 40% of the field is riding that, I'd rather be on the Blue Jays side of things and take some of the stacks and figure out a way to pay for it on the DraftKings slate. They're super expensive over there, at least at the top, but the back end is cheap enough and there's enough quality that you can make that work by rostering like a Lourdes Gurriel and a Matt Chapman in there. So I like the Blue Jays hitters rather than the John Gray side of it on DK. I don't think I would reach 5% John Gray on FanDuel tonight. Probably not.
Is it just a pay up option when you have this short of a slate and a couple of guys that just stand out? Like, why risk 39% of the field with you on a guy in John Gray just to save $3,000 when if you stacked Morton and Scherzer, you'd still be at the same level of the field, but the chances of both of those guys coming through is going to be exponentially higher than John Gray. So normally, if you do have like a larger slate, I don't even know if this question comes up. But I don't know if it's just a spend up night for top two guys. And B, why not take a bet? Like, again, I'm going to a lineup with power. I get it. But if you like Toronto as your top stack and I'm following Terry tonight, then wouldn't I be better off taking a shot at like Jake Odorizzi to save some money as opposed to John Gray?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think any one of these spots where you can say, all right, I am going to spend a little bit more to get to Merrill Kelly at 6,200. I'm going to spend 400 more to get to Jake Odorizzi. I do think that just the ownership offset in those situations with these level of pitchers, those three guys are essentially the same guy, right? There's not that much difference between Merrill Kelly, Jake Odorizzi, and John Gray right now. So just getting away from that ownership, even though you're paying a little bit more for it, even though maybe it cuts into a bat that you can buy, I think it makes some sense. I mean, there's value in that price. It definitely can afford you two bats in a stack, most likely. If you're saving, $2-3 grand from a Charlie Morton or a Jose Barrios, somebody like that, you can buy a lot of hitting quality there. You have to absolutely make sure that you're spending your money the right way if you do it. But for me, I just would rather get away from that much public weight and figure out a way to get to my stacks in a different way.
All right, you're all over Toronto. I saw here on the chat as well, Under Pressure Productions going for a J stack. So hopefully reading what you put out earlier and now following along here as well. What about Texas, right? Because you've covered Toronto, I feel like, a couple times over, and this is definitely going to be your top stack for Terry tonight, right? Is Toronto?
Yeah, they'll be there. The Braves will definitely be there. We'll see how it comes out in the wash when I run the lineups against the ownership and all the different little things I do as lock approaches.
Right.
But I definitely want to be in the Toronto Blue Jays business today. I think they're under owned. I mentioned Lourdes Gurriel, and for more on him, you can jump into my my article. But 4.2% owned for Toronto's 5-hitter at 3,100. That's a mistake. Alejandro Kirk is a very good catching prospect, 46.9% hard hit rate in his 189 plate appearances last year. Where you need a catcher, 3,400 at 12.7% ownership on DK, he's kind of interesting. Everybody except for him on the DK slate is owned under 10% of the time on Toronto. On the top end, it's because they're all over 5,000 in salary. It's difficult to get to them. But on the bottom end, I mentioned Matt Chapman earlier, 4,300, 5.5% ownership. I'm totally fine getting to Matt Chapman there. Still barrel the ball 13.7% of the time, 41.7% hard hit rate last season. I mentioned 27 home runs. He struggled to a 210, 314, 403, but 27 home runs and great contact numbers. Matt Chapman's still Matt Chapman. He's cheap. He's low owned. On the Texas side, which is what you actually asked about, there's a
lot of leverage out here for the Texas Rangers.
There's definitely some low-owned spots. There's some interesting players in that lineup. They're an improved lineup, adding Marcus Semien in there, adding Corey Seager, adding Brad Miller, Mitch Garver is a power hitting catcher. There's some interesting spots there. Nate Lowe is he's low. I always get mixed up between the lows and the lows. Nate Lowe is interesting in there. You've got the top 6 hitters all had better than a 40% hard hit rate last season. The low man on that list is 41.3% for Marcus Semien, who hit 45 home runs last year. So there's a lot of premium contact in the top 6 hitters there. I wouldn't sleep on Adolis Garcia, 1% owned, 5,100 on DK. He's only 2,900 on the FanDuel slate, but still only drawing 1% ownership. Guy hit 31 home runs and stole 16 bases last season. Pretty productive player for fantasy purposes. Cole Calhoun is at the back end of that lineup as a lefty going up against Jose Barrios here. He's not totally crazy to get to. Willie Calhoun in the 9 spot kind of acts like a wraparound guy. He is a former top end prospect, post hype type guy who was a really highly regarded hitting prospect on his way up, who just hasn't really come through at the major league level. Gave us 6 home runs in 284 plate appearances last year, still 41.4% hard hit rate, only barreled the ball 3.5% of the time. So needs to focus on getting the fat part of the bat on the ball, but still only struck out 12% of the time, walked 7.4. So he's a premium hit tool guy who needs to figure it out at the major league level, but he's super sneaky. 2,200 and 1% owned on FanDuel, 35 and 1% on DK. So I don't mind getting to this lineup. They're not my priority. They're not somebody a team that I'm rushing out to roster, but I'm also not afraid of going up against Jose Barrios. 26.1% strikeout rate, 359 xFIP, cut his whip down to a career low 1.06 based on a lower walk rate, based on some success generating ground balls and getting a lot of atom balls last season. But he's a gettable pitcher. and he's going to be on 35% on the DK slate. He's going to be on 17% on the FanDuel slate. So going to those super low owned hitters that are affordable helps you get to some of the other more highly priced stacks that we talked about when you're rostering an expensive pitcher, and it's attacking a fairly highly owned pitcher. So I don't mind the Rangers here.
All right, let's move to this Reds-Braves game here, because the Braves are sitting right there as far as our top projected stack on our top stacks tool. And amazingly, and I think a lot of it has to do with cost here, there's still a small sliver of leverage, right? They're just on the positive side. Even if it's only a 1/10 of a point, we'll take whatever we can get here. So as much as you're on Toronto, and I get it, like Acuna's still out and the Braves are still finding their way, Olsen in for Freeman and stuff. But how is this not a smash spot for Atlanta's stack just because of who they're going up against? And the fact that they're not like -3 or 4 on a leverage score, doesn't that make you want to get to Atlanta even more?
Does. Yeah. For me, I mean, for them to be at essentially like even efficient ownership
Yes.
on this, in this situation. Yeah, that makes me want to attack that because it's not appropriate, right? The slate is not getting to them enough. We're talking about a team going up against a weak quad A type lefty, a kid who hasn't been able to pitch his way really out of the minor leagues. This is a team that, using last year's numbers, this year's active roster would have had a 218 ISO against lefties. That would have been second in baseball. 21.5% strikeout rate would have been 10th. A 112 WRC plus was 7th. A 4.61% home run rate was second best in baseball. I mean, this is a murderer's row type of a team. Especially against left-handed pitching. You've got monstrous home run hitters lurking in here like Adam Duvall. Austin Riley's got a tremendous bat. Ozzie Albies himself is the leadoff man. He hit 30 home runs and stole 20 bases last year. He's hitting in front of Matt Olson now, who hit 39 home runs, 48.4% hard hit rate. There's nothing not to like about this Braves stack. It plays at least 1 through 8, and I don't hate Orlando Arcia as a min-price bolt-on at the bottom end of the lineup. He's not done very much, but he's min-priced and he could wrap the thing around for you. That said, he's one of the more popular hitters because he's 2,500 on the DK slate.
Right.
You don't necessarily need to go there because there are a lot of very, very good hitters in the 4,000s on DK and in the 2,000s in the middle of this lineup. Going from Ozuna, Duvall, Rosario, Travis d'Arnaud, and Dansby Swanson, I would take that as a stack and leave out Albies, Olsen, and Riley on any given day. That's an equally good stack. The 3 hitters at the top that I just named there are absolute luxuries that you can bolt on to any of this. They're the 3 best hitters in the lineup, but from 4 through 8, this lineup plays very well as a stack on its own. So absolutely love everything.
Leverage basically that way, right?
Yep. Yeah. You can combine. It's all about, it's not only, hey, this guy's highly owned, so I can't play him. It's all right, this guy's highly owned, so I need to work in a guy who's a little lower owned, a guy who's a less likely hitter to be combined with him. We're only hunting for low combinations. You don't win prizes for having a 1% owned guy in your lineup if he doesn't do anything, right? So we're looking for those. Right. Yeah. So we're looking for the low owned combinations of hitters who still have a very strong chance of success and still have a lot of correlation when they're hitting in the same stack. So working in an Eddie Rosario, working in an Adam Duvall around an Austin Riley, around a Marcelo Ozuna, who are a little higher owned. That's the way to differentiate these lineups. And you can do it with this Brave stack on both sides, really.
The most leverage you're going to find out here tonight is with the Cincinnati Reds. And I think the easy way to get to Cincinnati is if you're building multiple lineups and they don't have Charlie Morton in there. Now, all of a sudden, you can look at that. But again, as we've discussed here with teams, if we're looking at just now with Atlanta or trying to reduce cost with the Mets, there are multiple ways in which you can build a stack. It doesn't have to be a traditional, depending on what site you have, 3 or 4. So looking at the Reds, how can you take advantage of this super high leverage if in fact you're not rostering Charlie Morton as well on the other side?
Yeah, that's going to be the key. I mean, when you're not joining the 38% of the field on DK and the 27% on FanDuel that are rostering Charlie Morton, I think it does make sense to explore some red stacks here. For one, they're inexpensive across both sites. Everybody after Joey Votto in the cleanup spot is under 3,300. And a couple hitters above him are not all that expensive on the DK slate. And then everybody's in the mid 3s to low 2s on the FanDuel slate. So you can put together pretty much any hitters in this lineup with any other hitters in any stack you want. And they're all owned in the low single digits up against Morton here. I like Charlie Morton in general, but he's not an unhittable pitcher. 28.6% strikeout rate is very good. 7.7% walks is average. He puts guys on. He had a 104 whip last year, so he did well with the with allowing hits in keeping guys off base. Generated 12.4% swinging strikes. Again, like I said, he's a good pitcher, but he's gettable. And he struggles from time to time with like losing a little bit of his spin in certain starts. If his spin isn't there, he's a different pitcher than when his spin is really working, when his stuff is really working. First start of the year coming out, potentially, not throwing 110 pitches. There's a reasonable chance at least that the Reds can get to him here. And it's a lineup that's, they lost a lot of talent in, losing a guy like Jesse Winker, losing a guy like Castellanos to your team. Yeah, there's still talent in this lineup though. I'm sure you enjoyed that one. There's still talent in this lineup though. Like Jonathan India up at the top has some speed, has a decent hit tool. Tyler Naquin, lefty righty, is not a bad option hitting second. And then they brought in Tommy Pham, who's got power and speed, 15 home runs, 14 stolen bases, and 561 plate appearances last year. Joey Votto, everybody knows about. Tyler Stevenson is a reasonably good hitter for a catcher. So the top five are decent. And then you get a guy like Mike Moustakas hitting in the 7 spot, tons of power over the years, struggled in 206 plate appearances to a 208, 282, 372 last year with a 164 ISO. We know that Moose is better than that. Lefty righty against Charlie Morton. I don't mind going to him for 2,900 on DK, 2,500 multi-position on FanDuel, no ownership. And he's hitting behind Nick Senzel, who I also like. Another guy who's a post-hype prospect, really, really well-regarded hitting prospect, hit tool, speed, a 5-tool type guy who struggled with some injuries, has not really had it succeed at the major league level yet, has gone back and forth a few times, getting a bit of a chance now with some of those departures. So I like Nick Senzel here. I think it's a good opportunity to get him while he's still cheap and low owned. 31 on DK, 2,100 on FanDuel. That's a bargain. That's a good player who, like I said, is not quite gotten there yet, but I do believe in the talent in Nick Senzel. So I think you can put together some interesting red stacks here and just go after that public ownership on Charlie Morton. I like that plan.
All right. Something is out here in the chat. I need your thoughts on this by all means. And we can move on, right? Because this one breaks down to Morton versus the Reds, how you leverage that. You're not getting to San Martin. So we laid out the Braves here as well. I think we've covered this from multiple standpoints, right?
Yeah. We got this one top to bottom. Hit the Braves, both stacks. Yeah, I would take some shares of Charlie Morton, but I'll probably be below the field because I usually am on Charlie Morton, and I think I want to get to more to some more of these Reds bats, just because they also just help you get to other teams. Like these Reds will help you get to some Blue Jays bats where you're paying up for some of those pitching differences. Like this is a good team to use when you don't use super cheap John Gray as your SP2. You're going to Merrill Kelly or whoever for 1,000 more, like we talked about. Now save some money on your hitters. Go to these Reds bats. Attack 38% of the ownership on DK at the same time when you're also going away from John Gray. If you can put these Reds together with those Blue Jays, attack both those highly owned pitchers, now you're really talking. That's an interesting approach to the DK slate today. So I think they're in play.
All right, and we have 2 games left. So yes, we'll get to Uzi. We'll get to him as well. We'll get to everybody here before we get out as far as pitchers and stacks. Hit that thumbs up button, please, if you haven't already. Some of us are making major sacrifices to be here. I don't know if you knew this. You see this? You see? Look at this.
What we got there?
That's April 8th. All right, opening day, April 8th. All right.
So we're both sitting out our respective opening days.
Damage.
I'm telling you, man.
I don't know what that
to be here with you and Tyler
worth it, right?
and the Awesemo community was much more important. Getting people ready to win some money tonight was much more important than being there for the Phillies home opener. Okay, I just want you to know that. If that's not worth a thumbs up, what is?
Yeah, come on.
And seriously. I can't make that story up. I had to show you the press pass so that you would believe me. Otherwise, you're thinking, "Oh, you're just out there bullshitting." No,
I don't know. I don't have press access at Yankee Stadium. I just have my, typical schmo off the street upper deck seat that I get for my Saturday games. But I also sat out opening day. But I was actually, for a part of the day, it ran through my head like, there's probably some really, really cheap, like hourly rate motels around Yankee Stadium somewhere. I could probably grab a room, do the show from there, and then go over. But we didn't go that route this time. Maybe tomorrow.
I'm sure you could get your phone, right? Like you need somebody who turns their phone into a hotspot, and then you can sit there, connect, and you could probably do this show in the
from my seated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Show from my seated.
Absolutely. You get the iPad, everything out there, you'll be fine.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. Okay.
As you were saying that the Doc Brown quote from Back to the Future ran through my portable television studio.
Yes. All-time villain in a baseball movie. Who's the number one villain in any baseball movie? Has to be a movie that has baseball in it. I don't care if it's like, well, no, just has to be baseball related. Doesn't need baseball in the title, etc. But just who's the most memorable villain all time in a baseball movie?
What about De Niro in The Fan?
Wow.
Stalker going after Wesley Snipes.
Wesley
was the big star coming to the San Francisco Giants.
Yeah, I thought you were going to go comedy, which there
so did I until that popped into my head.
Yes, that is amazing. That might be it. Wow, De Niro, like of all things that De Niro gets criticized for being outside of the typecast role that he is, right? That was an amazing performance by him.
That was actually, it's been on cable recently, which is probably why it popped in there. And I watched it for the first time in, I don't know, the better part of a decade. It's a better movie than I remembered it. He's good. Wesley Snipes, always good to see Wesley. And he pulls off like the athletic, he's somewhat believable as a baseball star. So yeah, little, maybe, I don't know if I want to go full underrated movie, but better than I thought it was. So
you want to know what doing sports talk radio is like in Philadelphia? It's a combination of De Niro in The Fan and Patton Oswalt in Big Fan. Just think of that. The worst ugly combination of the two. All right, just something to think about there. I mean, Major League has to be there, right? Carlos put that up there. Yeah,
I was thinking like, Jack Parkman from Major League 2 ran through my head.
Hold on a second. Parkman doesn't top the owner in Major League 1.
Yeah, if you want to go, Rachel
right?
Phelps, the owner. That's true. Yeah, I was thinking more on field as it was going through my head.
Win the whole damn thing, right?
Yeah, that's you. Cross him off then.
All right, just check it, man. Just check. Anything else pops in the chat, we'll see here. By all means, we'll go to Houston at LA, and we'll start, of course, with the Stros. This is a good one where Astros are really a tight road dog here. That total's been bumped up from last night. Talked about Odorizzi really as far as another cheap option versus Reed Detmers, who, and this is something you mentioned, so correct me if I'm wrong. This may be where people get caught looking at what Detmers did in Double-A as opposed to what he did, 2 years ago when he got roughed up here in the majors. So I don't know how much you're getting to either one of these pitchers. It's probably for completely different circumstances, but let's just at least look at this pitching matchup.
Yeah, it's probably going to lean toward the Odorizzi side of it for me if I'm going to either one of these guys. 20.6% strikeout rate last season, 7.7% walks. It's ugly. It's a 4.82 xFIP. It's a 1.25 WHIP, only a 9.6% swinging strike rate. Most concerningly, a 23.8% called plus swinging strike rate. That's the worst mark I think I've ever seen. So Odorizzi was definitely not throwing a lot of strikes last year. Where I'm kind of leaning into him as far as the cheap pitching though goes is I don't think as much of this Angels lineup, I don't think as a lot of other people might. I do. Obviously, Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani are phenomenal players, among the best players in the league. After the two of them, I like Anthony Rendon still, but he's got to give us a little bit of a show me season this year to prove that he's still there. Jared Walsh, I think, is a good hitter. Joe Adell hasn't gotten there nearly yet on the major league level, and there's plenty of strikeouts in his bat, and there's a massive amount of strikeouts in the back end of the lineup. So it's not like we're talking about a good strikeout pitcher, but maybe Odorizzi finds a couple bonus strikeouts from a guy like Max Stassi, a guy like Tyler Wade, somebody in the back end of the lineup there, pulls a few extra strikeouts together and gives us just enough at 5,800 and 18% ownership on DK that he's a serviceable alternative SP2 to John Gray, who again is also not in a good situation. I like the situation a little bit better for Odorizzi. I think Gray is the better of the two pitchers, but I think it's closer than the ownership is giving it credit for. So you could maybe get away with Odorizzi here. I don't love it. It's not something that I'm running out there saying, put Jake Odorizzi in 150% of your lineups and run away with it. Not by any means, but I do think he's at least salary-based value.
This is not take a shower after suggesting him like it could be with San Martin.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't feel as dirty as it would to do something like that, or as bad as it would to suggest a guy like Reed Detmers going up against what is one of the best lineups in baseball. Let's be honest. I mean, cheating or not
maybe
cheating.
we could just talk stacks then, right? In this case.
I think so. I think that's probably the better approach here. Everything about the Astros stack from top to bottom where you can afford it is perfectly fine to go to attack. Excellent hitters like Jordan Alvarez with all his ridiculous power, monster home run mark for him in the middle of the lineup. Kyle Tucker coming off a huge breakout year, 30 home runs, 14 stolen bases for Tucker last season, 557 slugging percentage at 263 ISO, created runs 47% better than average. Yuli Gurriel, I mention all the time, gets slept on constantly. Batting title last season, 41.4% hard hit rate, only struck out 11.2% of the time, walked 9.8%, just puts the ball in play all the time. He's hitting 5th behind a spectacular list of hitters in front of some other good ones, and he costs $2,600 on the FanDuel slate. Yuli Gurriel is somebody I definitely want to roster if I'm putting Astros bats in my lineup on FanDuel. 5,100, he's much more of a take him or leave him as you go through the stack option on DK, but he's still a spectacular hitter and somebody I want to have in my stacks. So yeah, taking any of these Astros bats going up against Reed Detmers here, I think is a win. A guy like Chas McCormick is somebody that everybody might be sleeping on. 11.5% popularity on DK for 3,400 should probably be a little bit higher. Same story with 9.5% at 2,100 on the FanDuel slate. Chas McCormick, rather, 10.2% barrel rate, 48.7% hard hit rate last season, hit 14 home runs for us in 320 plate appearances. Underrated player, underrated power bat in the back end of that lineup. So he could be somewhat interesting there.
Awesome. And look, just a couple of minutes ago here, I'm sitting patting myself on the back about this major sacrifice that I made for not being out there in the home opener. My game was over. My game was over for a while. Terry's sacrifice is not only not being there, but with a straight face, giving minutes worth of analysis as his Yankees taking on the Red Sox now in the bottom of the 10th. With the bases loaded still I have with one out. Like, how you are not just, hey, man, just give me a second here. How you have not said that at all deserves, I wish I could hit the thumbs up button 500 times for you on that.
Well, the people get a little bit lucky because there's a ring light like right here, which is directly in front of where the TV is back there. So I can only see like the score in the top corner.
Smart.
I can see, who do we have up? Glaber's up. All right.
They just intentionally walked Hicks, I see, right?
All right. Let's come on, kid. Glaber's got to have a big turnaround this season.
Yeah, look, we'll let you know if something major happens. I'm sure you'll be well aware of it, by all means. Oh, by the way, another suggestion from Carlos Manzo on the chat. How about the dog from Sandlot? That's an underrated answer right there.
I was thinking that, but not to spoil anything for a 30-year-old kids movie for anybody.
Tyler hasn't seen this movie yet, right?
Tyler hasn't seen The Sandlot? Chris, if you're listening, can we fire Tyler? He shouldn't be producing baseball.
Eytan, I may only be 23, but if I hadn't seen The Sandlot, I would have been disowned by my father a long time ago.
All right, there we go.
Okay, I feel like there are movies that we reference that you've never seen.
Sandlot like 4, which is arguably not even a movie at that point. Like
I'll never watch any of the sequels. Yeah, I'll never watch any of the sequels. The first one is a perfect movie. I will never watch any of the sequels. First one's great.
A sequel for The Sandlot? What are we doing here?
It's ridiculous.
My goodness.
Sandlot 2 did have a really good soundtrack, though. I'll give it.
I think only Karen Allen was the only person who came back for that one too, right?
Yeah, well, she must
which is weird. She was the mom. Right. But yeah, the dog turns good by the end though. So he pickles the beast, and then he's just hanging out on the third baseline in the at the end. So
okay,
I think he goes good. Probably doesn't count.
Okay. Well, I liked it, Carlos, but Terry's the judge.
My top villains get no redemption. I need my villain to die unredeemed to be a top villain. Like
Ronald De Niro, right? Robert. Jeez, I'm looking at this Acuna story here. Just conflated the two. All right. Anything left with this game as far, moving on from a pitching standpoint, talking about that Houston stack, Angels as well. You're going to get a little bit more leverage with the Angels than you are with Houston. It's going to cost a little bit more. That's the problem.
Yeah, and it's because, we're going to guys who are just widely acknowledged, super popular star caliber players where I think the talent level on a guy like Jordan Alvarez, a guy like Kyle Tucker is approaching Shohei Ohtani levels. And he's much more expensive, much more popular just because of who he is, just because he's the big name. Like I said, I love the two top hitters, Ohtani and Trout, in that lineup. I like Walsh and Rendon. I don't love getting to the rest of this lineup in stacks, though. They're a flawed lineup top to bottom. They're not the greatest team in the world in terms of sequential hitting. Joe Adell, I think, is going to eventually flash immense power in the majors. He's shown it all through his career in the minors coming up, but he's not there yet. Brandon Marsh, there's a lot of strikeouts there and not a ton of production. Max Stassi is a relatively productive catcher. He's fine, but I'm not going out of my way to throw a catcher into my lineup on FanDuel. You can get away with him on DK, maybe as a one-off catcher, 4.1% owned, 4,300. Doesn't really have tons of correlation with the top of the lineup hitting seventh. So I just don't love outside of the top couple premium, super expensive, super popular hitters here. I don't love getting to the Angels. I do think it's a good spot though against Odorizzi. We talked about his lack of real strikeout upside and his lack of the ability to even throw strikes at this point. So where you're not putting Odorizzi in as a value option, you can grab some Angel stacks.
All right, brother. Last game here, final 4 minutes or so. Yeah. Ace Ventura wasn't a baseball movie. That's more of a football movie, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely more. I don't remember any baseball whatsoever in Ace
No.
Ventura. A lot of football. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's look at the Padres. Padres short favorite, if you will, minus 136 or so. Odd Shopper, of course, best place to go and check everything out there. So overall, when you look at this game, and we talked a bunch now from stacks to pitchers leading up to this here, and you've got two guys on completely different sides of the cost spectrum here when it comes to a pitching standpoint. Ownership, though, is a little bit more narrow of a gap between the two.
Yeah, for sure. And both pitchers are at least relevant for, where they're priced and the matchups that they have. We talked about Kelly a few times coming through the show. At 6,200, he's under 10% owned as that alternative play on the DK slate as an SP2. I know a lot of people would be worried about throwing a pitcher up against the Padres reputationally. If you really look at this lineup, to me, this is a flawed lineup. This is not a great team when Fernando Tatis is not in this lineup. Trent Grisham is fine, but he was a 36.5% hard hit rate, 5.2% barrels, struck out 22.6% last year, hit 15 home runs, 171 ISO. Not a major threat, only a 327 on base. Manny Machado is a star caliber player, no doubt about it. But then it immediately goes to Jake Cronenworth, Luke Voit, Eric Hosmer, Will Myers, a lot of flawed hitters before it gets to like a Jerkson Profar, Austin Nola level. There's not really a lot that I'm worried about in this lineup. I consider Luke Voit a very overrated hitter. So I'm not threatened by him here. CJ Abrams, premium rookie, if he's in the lineup, could certainly do some damage, but totally unproven at the major league level. So I'm not going to sweat that. Kelly is not a premium strikeout pitcher. He's much like Odorizzi, 19.5% strikeout rate last year, 4.24 xFIP, a 1.29 whip, 26.1% CSW percentage. So throws a few more strikes than Odorizzi does. Similar strikeout rates, similar contact profile. I just think that going up against this lineup, it's not like he's going to rack up 10 strikeouts for you, but he might get through enough clean innings and might just give you that serviceable SP2 score that would work for us, because I don't think we're going to have a dominant SP2 on this slate. So I think just a handful of quality points out of them rather than upside points, if that makes sense, is enough at 6,200 and that just massive offset of ownership that we're getting from him. So I think he's in play. And then Manaea, I think, is actually a good pitcher going up against a bad team in a good spot. I don't think he's owned enough. 9,400, 15% ownership. That feels a little light. 15% at 8,800 on FanDuel is definitely a little light. This Diamondbacks lineup is bad. So I'm comfortable throwing Sean Manaea. I'm comfortable paying up for him there. 25.7% strikeout rates, 3.62 xFIP, 12.3% swinging strike rate. Fire away with some Sean Manaea shares there. He's under owned.
Yeah, and I know Uzi, a couple of other people waiting, eagerly anticipating you getting to Sean Manaea. Even though you referenced him in the beginning and in positive reference, of course. So the fact that we were able to close out and answer a lot of people's questions on Manaea as well. I don't know. We've got about 30, 45 or so before we get out of here. Is there anything else you would like to squeeze in here? I mean, you've done a lot, my friend, and you've got a baseball game, I think, to watch as well. So it's 5-5, by the way.
Got a 5 now. Yeah.
I missed whatever
happened, but we're tied.
Why don't you just go watch this baseball game? How about that?
I like that plan. Padres seem a little bit overowned if you're stacking Padres, because like I said, I don't really love that lineup. There's talent there. They're going up against Merrill Kelly. You can grab some shares of them, but I think they're overowned. I don't really want many Diamondbacks. We can wrap it on that.
I love doing shows, brother, with you as always. Thanks to Tyler for producing. Don't go anywhere here. In 5 minutes, It's the NBA Deeper Dive with Lofty and Adam. So we'll get you all ready for the slate tonight of the NBA. Thumbs up button, subscribe. You know the drill. We'll see you soon. Enjoy the night. Enjoy the weekend.